Attention, the letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Sylvia Pemberton would later think was appropriate. Tuesdays being the sort of day nothing good ever started at Mewman. She had been sorting through her father's correspondence when she found it, tucked beneath a stack of unpaid accounts that she had already arranged by date and urgency, as that was the kind of thing Sylvia did. She arranged. She catalogued. She made order from the chaos that her father, Sir Aubrey Pemberton, had left behind when his heart gave out the previous November, taking with it whatever remained of the family's dignity and leaving behind only debts. The letter was from Ashfield Park. More precisely, it was from the office of Lord Calloway, not the old Lord Calloway, who had been a decent man by most accounts, but the new one, the one who had inherited 18 months ago, and had since been conducting what polite society called a review of estate obligations, and what Sylvia called something else entirely when she was alone. She read it twice. Then she set it on the desk beside the oil lamp and looked at it for a long moment before reading it a third time, in case she had misunderstood. She had not misunderstood. The Pemberton family had leased the cottage at Greywood, a modest stone house at the edge of the Ashfield property, for 42 years. The original agreement, signed by Lord Calloway's grandfather and Sylvia's grandfather, had been renewed twice, once in 1841 and again in 1863. The current lease did not expire until 1892. That was 11 years from now. The letter informed Sylvia that the lease would not be renewed and that the cottage must be vacated by the 1st of March. It was already the 16th of January. She did not panic. Sylvia Pemberton was not, by nature or by practice, a person who panicked. She had not panicked when her mother died. She had not panicked when her brother Freddie took himself off to Halifax, with the last of the household silver and a woman named Georgette who smelled of gardenia water. Not panicked when the creditors came, or when the solicitor told her with a particular variety of gentle pity she had come to recognize and despise that there was, essentially, nothing left. What she did instead was think. She thought for the rest of the evening, through a supper of cold mutton and bread that she ate standing at the kitchen counter, because it seemed wasteful to set a full table for one person. She thought, while she washed up, and while she banked the fire, and while she sat in her father's old chair. The one piece of furniture she could not quite bring herself to sell, with a blanket across her knees and the letter in her hand. By morning she had decided she would go to Ashfield Park herself. Not to beg. She wanted to be very clear with herself about that, even in private. She was not going to beg. No. She was going to present the facts of the situation calmly and plainly, because she had them. She had spent the better part of the night locating the original lease agreement. She folded inside a worn leather portfolio she found at the back of her father's wardrobe, and she had read it with the same careful attention she gave to everything. The language was unambiguous. The lease was in effect. Lord Calloway. The current one, this new one she had never met, did not have the legal standing to demand they vacate before 1892. She would tell him so, She dressed the next morning in her best grey wool, which was not very impressive, but was clean and well pressed, and communicated, she hoped, that she was a person who took things seriously. She pinned her dark hair back with more precision than usual. When she was 29 years old, and she had been managing one crisis or another for the better part of 4 years, and she had learned that how you entered a room mattered, even when, especially when the room belonged to someone with considerably more power than you. The drive to Ashfield Park took 40 minutes by hired gig. She had not been inside the house since old Lord Calloway's Christmas gathering 5 years ago, when her father was still alive, and the family was only modestly embarrassed rather than thoroughly ruined. She remembered the entrance hall as being very large and somewhat cold, with a portrait of some ancestral Calloway looking disapproving above the fireplace. The butler who answered the door was a thin man of about 60, with an expression of practiced neutrality. "Miss Pemberton," she said, "I have come to speak with Lord Calloway regarding a matter of some urgency. His lordship does not receive unannounced visitors." "I am aware of that," she said pleasantly. "However, at tea, I have received a letter from his office that I believe requires clarification, and as the matter concerns a legal document, I thought it more efficient to discuss it directly rather than through correspondence." She paused. "I am happy to wait." The butler considered her for a moment. She had the impression he was looking for some reason to send her away that would hold up to scrutiny, and then stepped back. She waited in a small sitting room off the entrance hall for 23 minutes. She counted many. There was a clock on the mantel, and she watched it while she sat with her hands folded and the leather portfolio on her lap. And she thought about the wording of the original lease agreement, and about how she would explain it clearly without being either apologetic or aggressive, and about whether the price of coal was going to increase again this winter. When the door finally opened, the man who entered was not what she had expected. She was not entirely sure what she had expected. Old Lord Calloway had been a comfortable, ruddy-faced man who smelled of pipe tobacco and spoke with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once worried about money. She had assumed his nephew would be similar. Lord Calloway, this Lord Calloway, was perhaps 35. He was tall and dark-haired and had the kind of face that might have been called handsome if it were not currently arranged in an expression of profound impatience. He glanced at her once, briefly, the way a person glances at an object in the wrong place, and then looked at the letter she had placed on the table beside her. "Miss Pemberton," he said. Not a question, a statement of mild inconvenience. "Lord Calloway." She stood. "Thank you for seeing me. My secretary tells me you have a concern regarding a lease agreement." "I do." She lifted the portfolio and set it open on the table. "Pemberton family has leased Greywood Cottage for 42 years. This is the original agreement, signed by your grandfather and mine in 1839. And this," she turned to the relevant page, "is the renewal of 1863, which extended the lease through the 1st of March, 1892. That is 11 years from now." He looked at the documents. He did not pick them up. "The estate is undergoing a significant restructuring," he said. "A number of long-standing arrangements are being reviewed and, where necessary, concluded." "I understand that," Sylvia said. "However, a lease agreement is a legal contract, not be concluded unilaterally by one party before its expiry date without cause." Something shifted in his expression. A slight tightening, almost imperceptible, around the eyes. "Are you a solicitor, Miss Pemberton?" "No." "I am the person who will be without housing in 6 weeks if the terms of this agreement are not honored." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. "The cottage," he said, "is needed for estate purposes." "What purposes?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. for the first time since he'd entered, and she had the impression that no one had asked him that question in quite that way. As though the question itself were slightly impolite, as though it were understood that when a lord said a thing was needed for estate purposes, the matter was settled. That is not your concern. With respect, Sylvia said, it is precisely my concern. If you intend to break a legal contract, you will need cause. And if you have cause, I would like to know what it is, so that I can respond to it appropriately. She watched him decide how to respond to this. She was good at reading people. Necessity had made her so, and she could see him weighing several options. He settled, finally, on a kind of cold courtesy that she recognized as the register men used when they wished to end a conversation without appearing openly rude. I will have my solicitor look into the matter, he said. You will hear from his office. I have already heard from your office, she said. That is why I am here. He moved toward the door in a way that indicated the meeting was over. Sylvia gathered the portfolio carefully, aligning the edges of the documents before she closed it. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair and folded it over her arm. She looked at Lord Calloway, who was standing by the door with the air of a man who expected her to thank him for his time. I will wait to hear from your solicitor, she said. I hope, for both our sakes, that he reads the lease agreement more carefully than your office appears to have done. She walked past him into the entrance hall, and out through the front door, and down the gravel drive without looking back, and the cold January air hit her like a wall, and she walked straight into it. It was only in the hired gig, halfway down the lane, with the bare winter hedgerows going past on either side, that she allowed herself to breathe properly, but nothing for 5 days. On the 6th day, a note arrived from Lord Calloway's solicitor, a Mr. Fenn, whose handwriting suggested he was a careful man, asking if she would be available to meet the following Wednesday to discuss the Greywood lease. She wrote back that she would. The meeting was not with Lord Calloway. It was with Mr. Fenn, who was indeed careful, and who had clearly read the lease agreement in full and understood what it said. He offered a sum of money, a goodwill payment, he called it, in exchange for vacating the property early. She looked at the figure. It was not an unreasonable sum. It would cover several months of rent elsewhere, with some remainder. She understood that this was the sensible option, the practical one, the one that a person in her position would be unwise to refuse. What is the cottage needed for? She asked. Mr. Fenn cleared his throat. I'm not certain I'm at liberty to. I would like to know, she said, what legitimate estate purpose requires the removal of a tenant with 11 years remaining on her lease. He looked at his papers. I believe Lord Calloway intends to bring the property under direct estate management. There are plans to expand the home farm. The home farm cannot expand in any other direction. I'm not a surveyor, Miss Pemberton. No, she said. You're a solicitor, which means you know, as I do, that this offer does not alter the legal situation. You are asking me to voluntarily surrender a right I am not obligated to surrender, You would be compensated, I would be displaced, she said. From a home my family has occupied for 42 years, 6 weeks after my father's death, in the middle of winter. Mr. Fenn had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. She left without accepting the offer. She walked home. It was only 2 miles, and she needed the cold air, and she thought about practicalities. If she refused and Lord Calloway pursued the matter through the courts, It would cost money she did not have. If she accepted, she would have enough to find other accommodation, ignore. But she would also have established that she could be removed when it was convenient for someone with more power than her to do so, and she found she minded that rather a lot. She was still thinking about it when the knock came at the cottage door the following afternoon. She opened it to find Lord Calloway himself standing on her step. He was not accompanied by anyone. He was wearing a riding coat and looked as though he had come directly from the stables, which she found she did not know what to do with. "May I come in?" he said. She stepped back from the door. He stood in the small parlour and looked around at it. At the bookshelves that covered 2 full walls, the neatly ordered desk, a fire she had built, to a size carefully calculated to heat the room without wasting fuel. She watched him look at it and tried to see it through his eyes and couldn't quite manage it. "You didn't accept Mr. Fenn's offer," he said. "No." "Why not?" She looked at him. "Because I don't believe I should be required to." He said nothing for a moment. Edina. Then he went to the bookshelf and looked at the spines, the way people do when they need something to do with their eyes. She watched him and waited. "My grandfather knew your grandfather," he said finally. "Yes, he spoke of him." He paused. "He spoke well of him." She did not say anything to this, because she did not know what he wanted from it. To me. He turned from the bookshelf and looked at her properly, the way he had not done in their first meeting, and she had the strange sensation of being seen rather than assessed, which were different things. "I have been told," he said, "that the way in which this matter was handled was not well done." "No," she agreed. "It was not." "By whom?" "By everyone involved," she said. "Including me, I was perhaps more abrupt with you than the situation required." He looked briefly startled by this. "You were defending your home." "Yes, and you were attempting to manage an estate, the size of which I can only imagine, with obligations and pressures I am not privy to. I don't think either of us was at our best." The silence that followed was different from the one in his sitting room. That one had been a contest. This one was something else. "The home farm," he said slowly, "does not actually need to expand to the east." She waited. "There is land to the north that would serve the purpose as well. Possibly better." He said it with some difficulty, she thought. Not because he was lying, but because he was the kind of person who did not often find himself reversing course. "I should have known that before the letter was sent. I didn't, because I hadn't examined the surveys carefully enough." "Did someone examine them for you?" "My land agent." "After you pointed out that there ought to be cause." She looked at him, and he looked at her, outside. A crow called once and went quiet. "So the cottage is not needed," she said. "Not for that purpose." "No. Then the letter should not have been sent." "No," he said. "It should not." She went to the desk and poured 2 cups of tea from the pot she had made an hour ago, because she was cold and she needed something to do with her hands, and because the tea was still warm enough, and there was no reason not to. She set 1 cup on the table near him without asking whether he wanted it. He picked it up. She sat in the chair near the fire. He remained standing, which felt right for reasons she couldn't have articulated. "My father managed this estate very differently," he said after a while. "I have been trying to be efficient, to understand the numbers, to make things orderly." He paused. "I think I may have been efficient about the wrong things." "It is a common mistake," she said, "to optimize before you understand." He looked at her with something she might, in different circumstances, have called curiosity. Is that from somewhere? From experience, she said. He set the teacup down. He looked at the fire. He looked at her bookshelves again, and then back at her, and she thought she could see him deciding something. Something more considered than what he'd decided in their first meeting, more carefully weighed. The lease will be honored, he said. In full. I will have Mr. Fenn send confirmation in writing. Thank you. And if you are willing, he said, and then stopped. She waited. The estate accounts, he said. They are not in disorder precisely. But there are things in the older records that I don't fully understand. Historical arrangements, things that were understood between my grandfather and various tenants that were never properly documented. He seemed to be choosing his words with more care than she'd seen him use before, to say, I wonder whether you might be willing to look at some of the older documents. As a consultant, properly engaged and compensated. Not, he added, and she saw something that might have been a flash of self-awareness, not as a favor. She considered this for a moment. The fire settled. The crow outside had been joined by another. I would want to see the scope of the work before agreeing, she said. Of course, and I would want it understood that if I identify further errors of the kind I identified in my own lease, I will say so clearly. I would expect nothing less. Then I am willing to look, she said. It was not a large thing as things went. It was a conversation in a small parlor between two people who had begun badly and were attempting, cautiously, to begin again. Outside, the light was already going, the January afternoon collapsing into early dark the way January afternoons do. Inside, the fire was still burning and the tea was still warm, and the books were still on their shelves. And Sylvia Pemberton was still in her home. She would remember later that it was in that moment, not when he apologized, not when he confirmed the lease, but when he asked for her help without pretending it was not help he was asking for. That she allowed herself to think that this man might in time be worth knowing. She did not say that, did she? She refilled his teacup instead, and they looked at the fire. And outside the crows settled into the bare elm tree and were quiet, and the cottage was, for the first time in quite a while, warm.